On March 8, 2014, at precisely 8 o'clock in the evening, a commercial airliner departed from Kuala Lumpur International Airport, the capital of Malaysia, bound for Beijing. It was a routine overnight flight carrying 239 souls. The passengers hailed from 14 distinct countries, complemented by a crew of 12. The majority were Chinese nationals returning home. Among them were engineers, artists, elderly couples, and young families, including 3 small children, the youngest being 2 years old. As passengers settled into their seats, silenced their electronic devices, and closed their eyes, they anticipated a 5-hour and 12-minute journey, arriving in Beijing by morning. None could have foreseen that this particular aircraft would never reach its destination, and that 11 years later, the world would still be grappling with its ultimate fate. The flight commenced without incident. The plane ascended to its cruising altitude, establishing its course over the South China Sea. 38 minutes post-takeoff, the co-pilot made contact with air traffic control, a standard transmission stating, "Good night, Malaysian 370. This phrase signifies the handover between control sectors. A mere few minutes later, the aircraft was scheduled to establish communication with Vietnamese air traffic controllers. It never did. This is a crucial point to grasp. This was no diminutive private aircraft. It was a Boeing 777, one of the largest, most dependable, and technologically advanced airliners ever conceived. Measuring 63 meters in length, powered by 2 robust engines, and equipped with 3 independent hydraulic systems and triple redundancy for all critical functions, this aircraft type transports millions of passengers annually and is widely regarded as one of the safest ever manufactured. Across its entire operational history, encompassing thousands of aircraft traversing the globe, the number of fatal accidents is remarkably low. Boeing 777s do not vanish. They do not disappear without a trace, nor do they simply dissolve into thin air. Yet this is precisely what befell Flight 370, marking the beginning of an enigma that remains unsolved to this day. At 1:21 in the morning, the aircraft ceased to be visible on radar screens. It did not crash, nor did it explode. It simply vanished, as if a switch had been flipped, extinguishing a light on the controller's display. This event occurred because a critical device responsible for automatically transmitting the aircraft's location, altitude, and speed to the ground was deactivated. Without this transponder, air traffic controllers were rendered blind to the aircraft's presence. It became an invisible phantom. Concurrently, a second system, responsible for transmitting data regarding engine performance and onboard systems, also fell silent. 2 independent communication systems went offline almost simultaneously. While theoretically possible, such a coincidence is extraordinarily improbable. Deactivating the first device requires merely turning a switch within the cockpit. The second, however, necessitates access beneath the cockpit floor to disconnect specific wiring harnesses. This action could only be executed by an individual possessing intimate knowledge of the aircraft's construction. What followed was a period of confusion. Vietnamese controllers awaited contact, while Malaysian controllers assumed the aircraft had already entered Vietnamese airspace. Precious, irretrievable hours elapsed before both parties realized the aircraft had made no contact whatsoever. A search and rescue operation was initiated. Vessels and aircraft from a dozen nations scoured the South China Sea, the intended flight path. They searched for debris, oil slicks, and life rafts. Nothing was found, because the aircraft was not there. Families of the passengers gathered in hotels in Beijing and Kuala Lumpur, awaiting news. There was no news. Officials held press conferences, offering platitudes. "We are considering all possibilities. We are doing everything within our power." Relatives cried out, wept, and demanded the truth. The truth, however, was absent. This episode represented a profound failure in crisis communication. Authorities were unable to provide answers because they lacked understanding, and their inability to honestly admit this compounded the issue. Then, data emerged that dramatically altered the narrative. The Malaysian military accessed their radar recordings, not those reliant on transponder signals, but their actual military surveillance radar, capable of detecting any large airborne object. Their findings sent a chill down their spines. After disappearing from civilian radar, the aircraft had not plunged into the sea. Instead, it executed a sharp left turn, traversed the entire Malaysian peninsula from east to west, flying virtually over the very capital from which it had just departed, and emerged over the Strait of Malacca. It then proceeded northwest, circumnavigated the island of Sumatra, and vanished from military radar coverage. The aircraft was flying in the diametrically opposite direction to Beijing, a fact the military observed. They detected an unidentified blip on their screens, but took no immediate action. No fighter jets were scrambled, no attempts were made to establish contact, and no alert was issued to civilian controllers. They simply watched as the blip receded over the horizon. This moment is one of the most astonishing in aviation history. Military radar systems exist for one primary purpose: to detect and respond to unauthorized airborne objects. An unidentified aircraft traversing national airspace at night without communication precisely fits this scenario. This is the very reason for maintaining ready fighter squadrons capable of immediate deployment. Yet, no action was taken. It is possible the duty operator erroneously classified it as a civilian aircraft with a faulty transmitter. Perhaps it was overlooked, or, most disturbingly, the radar operated in an automated mode, with the recording only reviewed retrospectively. Had the Malaysian military reacted in real time, a fighter jet might have intercepted the aircraft, established visual contact, and attempted to communicate with the crew. In that instance, perhaps, the 239 individuals might still be alive. We will never know. But how do we know what transpired after the aircraft disappeared from military radar? This is where the most extraordinary facet of the saga unfolds. Every large passenger jet is equipped with a satellite antenna that periodically transmits a brief, automated signal towards a satellite. It functions akin to an electronic "I am here." This signal does not convey coordinates or audio, but rather a simple pulse confirming operational status, analogous to a mobile phone periodically pinging a nearby cell tower even when not actively in use. These signals had never previously been utilized for aircraft location. They were not designed for such a purpose. However, engineers at a satellite company discovered that by measuring the time it took for each signal to reach the satellite, they could calculate the aircraft's distance from the satellite at the moment of transmission. This did not provide a precise location, but rather a circular arc on which the aircraft could have been situated. The satellite registered 7 such signals after Flight 370's disappearance. The final signal was received 7 hours after the aircraft had vanished from radar. For that entire 7-hour period, the aircraft was in flight. Engineers calculated that all 7 signal arcs intersected within 2 potential geographical zones, one to the north, heading towards Central Asia, and another to the south, towards the Indian Ocean. The northern possibility was dismissed. An aircraft flying across India, Pakistan, and China would undoubtedly have been detected by those nations' military radar systems. No such detections were reported. This left the southern trajectory. The aircraft was heading south towards one of the most desolate regions on Earth, an area devoid of islands, ships, or human settlements, simply an endless ocean, several kilometers deep. To comprehend the sheer remoteness of this location, imagine being adrift in this exact oceanic point on an inflatable raft. The nearest landmass would be 1,000 kilometers away in any direction. No shipping lanes regularly traverse this region, and no commercial flights fly overhead. It is, quite literally, nowhere. A void on the map, occupied only by water, wind, and waves. Whoever guided the aircraft to this destination chose a location where it would be virtually impossible to find, and they nearly succeeded. After 7 hours of flight, presumably when its fuel reserves were depleted, the satellite registered the final signal. Following this, eternal silence ensued. But what transpired in the cockpit? Who deliberately turned the aircraft around? Who disabled all communication systems? Who navigated it southward for 7 hours into the abyss? 3 primary hypotheses exist, none of which has been definitively proven. The first posits a mechanical failure, a fire, a short circuit, a loss of cabin pressure, or some other technical catastrophe that crippled the aircraft's electronics and rendered the pilots incapable of controlling it. This explanation accounts for the loss of communication, but fails entirely to explain the complex maneuver, the flight over the capital city, and the 7-hour journey along a seemingly deliberate course. An aircraft with failed electronics does not perform such maneuvers. It either crashes or flies a straight path until fuel exhaustion. This aircraft, however, maneuvered with precision, as if piloted by someone intimately familiar with radar blind spots. The second theory involves an act of hijacking. It is hypothesized that an individual or individuals among the passengers breached the cockpit and assumed control. The 2 Iranian passengers traveling on forged passports immediately became primary suspects. However, subsequent investigations quickly established that they were undocumented migrants seeking passage to Europe, not terrorists. No other suspicious individuals were identified on board. Furthermore, the motive remains elusive. No organization claimed responsibility, and no demands were issued. If the objective was an act of terror, why fly for 7 hours into an empty ocean? If the aim was extortion, why the subsequent silence? The third hypothesis, considered the most plausible by professional investigators, suggests intentional action by one of the pilots. The captain, Zahari Ahmad Shah, a 53-year-old with extensive experience, was among the airline's most seasoned pilots. Following the aircraft's disappearance, police confiscated his home flight simulator, a sophisticated setup featuring multiple screens and a genuine flight yoke, which he used for recreation. The data from this simulator was sent to the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation, where investigators, sifting through thousands of saved virtual flights, uncovered one that profoundly silenced them. The virtual flight initiated from Kuala Lumpur, executed a westward turn, proceeded south, and concluded with a simulated crash in the Indian Ocean upon fuel depletion. This virtual route closely mirrored the calculated trajectory of the actual flight. However, this evidence is not conclusive. The captain possessed thousands of saved flights from across the globe, a common hobby among many pilots. The journey into the Indian Ocean could have been just one among many such virtual explorations. Investigations also revealed that Zahari was experiencing significant personal difficulties at the time, including marital issues and political disillusionment. Yet, millions navigate similar challenges without resorting to such extreme actions. Circumstantial evidence, while suggestive, does not constitute definitive proof. Nevertheless, the simulator route, the knowledge of radar blind spots, and the technical proficiency required to execute a silent maneuver with such a massive aircraft combine to form a compelling, albeit not absolute, picture. It is important to note that Captain Zahari was not an enigmatic figure. He was known as an affable, helpful individual with a deep passion for aviation. He maintained a YouTube channel where he posted videos on repairing household appliances like air conditioners and washing machines. He enjoyed cooking and frequently shared homemade meals with his colleagues. His friends and neighbors uniformly attested, "This man is incapable of such an act." This sentiment, incapable of such an act, is echoed in nearly every similar case. Individuals who commit heinous deeds rarely appear monstrous from the outside. They often seem ordinary because, in essence, they are ordinary people experiencing an internal breakdown. The investigation never uncovered a smoking gun, a piece of direct evidence unequivocally implicating the captain. The simulator route represents the closest approximation to such evidence. Moreover, it allows for alternative interpretations. Without the flight recorders, commonly known as black boxes, or transcripts of cockpit conversations, we may never definitively ascertain what transpired in the initial moments after the words, "Good night 370, were uttered. The official report, released by the Malaysian government in 2018, did not assign blame. It stated that the communication systems were likely deliberately disabled and that the aircraft was likely under control during the diversion. However, it did not identify who was in control. Families of the victims and independent experts criticized the report as evasive, suggesting the Malaysian government was unwilling to acknowledge the possibility of a pilot's involvement, as this would imply a deficiency in their pilot vetting system. What then of the passengers? What was the experience of the 227 individuals aboard during those 7 hours? Were they aware of what was happening? The most plausible scenario, and perhaps the least agonizing, suggests that if someone in the cockpit intentionally ascended the aircraft to maximum altitude and depressurized the cabin, metaphorically opening a window at an altitude of 12 kilometers, the passengers would have lost consciousness within minutes. At such an altitude, the air is so thin that without supplemental oxygen, individuals succumb within seconds. The oxygen masks, which deploy from overhead compartments, provide air for approximately 12 to 15 minutes. After this supply is exhausted, if cabin pressure is not restored, everyone in the cabin will lose consciousness within 15 minutes. Death from oxygen deprivation is painless. Individuals simply fall asleep. If this scenario holds true, the passengers on Flight 370 succumbed to unconsciousness over the South China Sea and never awoke. This, however, remains speculation. We do not know for certain. What we do know is that no passenger made any contact, whether by phone or any other means. 7 hours of silence, 227 lives, and not a single sound. Where is the aircraft? On this question, we have at least a partial answer. 18 months after its disappearance, in July 2015, a local resident on the remote island of Réunion in the western Indian Ocean discovered a piece of wing debris encrusted with barnacles. Subsequent analysis confirmed it was from the missing aircraft. More debris began washing ashore along the African coast, in Mozambique, Tanzania, Madagascar, and South Africa. Over 30 fragments were found, including sections of fuselage, interior paneling, and pieces of overhead baggage bins. Ocean currents had dispersed them over 1,000 kilometers from the presumed crash site. Each fragment represents a miniature tragedy, a piece of a baggage bin that once held someone's suitcase before they drifted to sleep, a section of fuselage that once shielded someone gazing out at the night sky, a part of a wing mechanism that, in the final moments of the flight, was either under precise control or flailing uselessly on an unguided machine. One fragment, discovered in Tanzania, bore marks indicative of a high-speed impact with water. This could suggest two possibilities. Either the aircraft descended uncontrollably as fuel depleted, entering a spiral descent and impacting the water with such force that it disintegrated, or someone maintained control until the very end and deliberately steered the aircraft into the water at a steep angle, minimizing debris and making the search as arduous as possible. The latter scenario is chilling, but explains the limited amount of wreckage found on the surface. If the aircraft entered the water nearly vertically, a significant portion of the debris would have sunk rather than spread across the surface. However, the precise crash site, the point on the ocean floor where the fuselage lies, has eluded discovery, despite considerable effort. Australia alone spent $200 million on underwater searches. Specialized submersibles meticulously surveyed the seabed at depths of 4 to 5 kilometers, scanning every meter. An area roughly the size of a small European nation was examined. Nothing. Subsequently, a private company conducted a second search operation, covering an additional 112,000 square kilometers of seabed. Again, nothing was found. The aircraft lies somewhere beneath, but the ocean is too deep. The seabed is too rugged, with underwater mountains and canyons, and debris may have been obscured by sediment and marine growth over the years. Locating a 60-meter object in these conditions is akin to searching for a coin in a city-sized field at night with a flashlight. To visualize the scope of this search, robots, roughly the size of small automobiles, crawled across the ocean floor in depths where no sunlight penetrates. They moved at walking pace, emitting sound waves and interpreting the returning echoes, much like a bat navigates in darkness. Every suspicious shadow on their screens, every rock resembling debris, every protrusion that might be a wing fragment would cause operators aboard the surface vessel to pause. The camera would be directed towards the object, lights would illuminate, and the screen would reveal a rock formation, a submerged boulder, or a solidified lava flow. Each time, a false alarm, dozens, hundreds of false alarms. For months, those involved in the search described the most exhausting aspect not as physical fatigue, but as the recurring renewal and subsequent crushing of hope each time something resembling the aircraft appeared on screen. The seabed in that region proved to be a veritable underwater mountain range, with volcanic peaks reaching kilometers in height, deep ravines, caves, and fields of solidified magma. Prior to the search for Flight 370, this section of the seabed had never been explored. Maps depicted a simple, flat blue expanse, but in reality, a landscape comparable to the Alps lay hidden beneath the waves. The aircraft could be lodged in a ravine, buried by a landslide, or resting on the slope of an underwater volcano, covered by sediment and coral. In 11 years, the ocean could have concealed it so effectively that even the most sensitive instrument would pass within meters without detecting it. In 2024, the same private company announced its intention to conduct another search using advanced technologies in a new area identified through updated calculations. Next-generation underwater robots operate with greater speed and enhanced visual capabilities compared to a decade ago. There is cautious optimism that this attempt may be successful, but no guarantees. Furthermore, even if the aircraft is located, it does not automatically guarantee an answer. The aircraft is equipped with 2 flight recorders, one capturing cockpit conversations and the other recording all technical flight parameters. However, their batteries are estimated to have depleted over 10 years ago, and while their casings are designed for extreme conditions, they may have sustained damage over the years on the ocean floor under hundreds of atmospheres of pressure. What will we hear if the recordings are ultimately recovered? Perhaps 30 minutes of silence. Perhaps 30 minutes that will illuminate everything. This incident has profoundly altered aviation. Following the disappearance of Flight 370, international aviation authorities implemented new regulations. Every passenger aircraft worldwide is now mandated to continuously transmit its location via satellite, ensuring that no aircraft can disappear for an extended period of 7 hours again. Regulations regarding access to the cockpit have been tightened. Psychological evaluations for flight crews have been intensified, and protocols for interaction between civilian and military air traffic controllers have been updated. Each of these changes is a direct consequence of the events of March 8, 2014. 239 lives were lost, but their tragic end may have saved thousands of future lives. For the families of these individuals, this flight is not a mystery or a true crime saga. It is an open wound that continues to ache daily. 11 years without answers, without bodies, without graves, without farewells. Psychologists refer to this as ambiguous loss, a state where individuals cannot move on from the deceased nor expect their return. Parents, children, husbands, and wives of those aboard this flight exist in a perpetual limbo between grief and hope. Each time news emerges, a discovered fragment, a new search announced, a new theory proposed, the wound reopens and fails to heal. This story serves as a stark reminder of what we often prefer not to contemplate, that in the 21st century, amidst a world of satellites, navigation systems, and instant communication, a colossal aircraft carrying 239 people can simply vanish. That the ocean remains vast and indifferent. That our knowledge of the ocean floor is less extensive than our understanding of the lunar surface. And that certain questions may never be answered, not because answers do not exist, but because they lie silently at the bottom of the ocean, 5 kilometers below millions of tons of water. 239 individuals boarded a routine overnight flight. Engineers en route to work, artists heading to an exhibition, grandparents returning from vacation, a mother with her 2-year-old son. Ordinary people who simply wished to travel from one city to another. Their photographs remain on shelves in homes where they are still awaited. Their story, abruptly cut short, hanging in the air like that final unanswered satellite signal, remains the most significant enigma in aviation history. And until the aircraft is found, this mystery will persist. Or perhaps it will never be solved. But you know what is most unbearable about this story? It is not the mystery, the conspiracy theories, or the technical details. It is the knowledge that somewhere in Beijing, a mother still keeps her phone turned on, the very phone her son asked her to charge before he departed. Somewhere in Kuala Lumpur, children have grown up without a father who simply left for a business trip and never returned. Somewhere in the Australian outback, an elderly woman faithfully sets 2 places at her table each morning, one for herself and one for her husband, who embarked on a trip 11 years ago and never returned. This isn't a puzzle for them to solve, it's simply their reality. It's a life defined by the inexplicable absence of a person, a void left without explanation, without a farewell, without any sense of closure. And this is the life she has lived, day after day, for the past 11 years.